The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 26. To be a fool. Efforts.
What's it get up to this time? Ron mumbled. What? Bloody Snape!
Harry looked up at the high table and watched as Snape cut his steak firmly.
"Are we staring at us?" Ron explained. "A whole minute, the creep."
Harry shrugged at his plate just when he thought he'd be left in peace. Ron's nudge startled him again.
"No, Harry, he's doing it again!"
Harry forced himself to look up, but Snape's eyes were focused on his plate again. Well, if Snape was staring at him, he was determined to have Harry miss it every time. It occurred to him that Ron's attempts to make Harry noticed were probably too obvious to Snape. He couldn't keep himself from always giving Snape a laugh, could he? Harry reasoned himself that even if he was staring, it didn't mean anything. Snape always looked at him. If a fly flew its way to the dungeons and fell in a potion, Snape would look for Harry and blame him and take points because somehow it had to be Harry's fault. This was how it had always been. Nothing new. He was aware of holding his breath, and he forced himself to calm down. "Oh, Ron!" Hermione leaned closer to take a better look at his face. "You have sauce all over your lips again!"
Harry snorted. He mentally went through the rest of his daily schedule and scrunched his face when he was reminded of Ginny waiting for him after their Quidditch practice. He used to like Ginny as a person. She didn't deserve this. Pushing himself to forget his worries, he shook his head as Hermione scolded Ron for his eating habits, while Ron nodded absently and continued eating with the same eagerness he always had. Snape was staring at him. Of course, he was staring at him. He was probably thinking of how he had allowed such a little pervert into his house for so long. Harry felt something like envy inside his stomach. Snape still had his personal space, a place where he could act and talk however he wanted, away from friends and curious people. Not that Snape had any friends anyway. And Harry didn't have the luxury of talking about his worries anymore. "Harry, what's wrong?" Hermione asked. "What, I'm eating like a pig too?" Harry beamed at her, and Ron mouthed "traitor" at him behind his back. "I just thought you seemed skeptical." Harry shook his head dismissively. "No, I'm just sleepy. Terribly sleepy, actually." The lies came easily these days. He didn't even mind the pretense most of the time. His days were passing dully, more slowly than ever, and every moment of joy was surreal, sparse. When he couldn't sleep, he'd think of way too many things, none of them welcome and none of them bearable. When he'd fall asleep, he wouldn't want to wake up. Somehow he had come to the conclusion that he was having a much better time asleep, without all the sadness and the happiness bothering him. Being back here was almost like waking up from a nightmare, relieved. Only he had woken up into a nightmare, and for some reason it was a blissful one. Or it should be. "Well, sleepy or not, hurry up, we're going to be late," Hermione said. Her voice was coming from miles away. "Right, charms," Harry said. "We'd better run. I wrote an excellent essay." "You copied my essay," Hermione said. "Let's go." Harry laughed, and he wondered what his fake laughter would look like in a mirror. Could he be fooled by it? "I copied it too, by the way," said Ron as he attempted to wipe the plum sauce from his lips, accidentally spreading it on his chin instead. Sometimes Harry thought that he had imagined it all. Potter was hunched over his examination sheet, a confused look on his face as he was trying to figure out what he'd done wrong. Of course, the answer was everything. "Mr. Potter," the boy looked up, "get yourself a new scroll from my desk and start over. Your scroll has so many scribbles I can barely locate the text." Potter nodded dully at his desk, and Severus had to mentally slap his own hand away from the impulse to grasp Potter's chin and tilt his head up. The boy wouldn't look at him. He hardly ever raised his head in his classroom anymore. Apparently Potter didn't find it necessary to confront him at all. Not after he kept knocking on his door for a week, and his efforts to meet him had passed in vain. Thank Merlin it had taken Severus only a week to get rid of him. What did he think, anyway, that this would continue? "But I asked for a new scroll half an hour ago, and you told me no, and to correct this one, sir." Right, now Severus was the one we scolded, wasn't he? Well, certainly not in his class, and not in this lifetime. 10 points from Gryffindor, Potter. He was aware of a female voice yelping somewhere behind Potter, and he defiantly ignored it as he returned to his desk. Severus decided to occupy himself with the construction of his teaching schedule for the second-year class when he was startled by Potter snatching a scroll from the stack before him and striding back to his seat.
Another 10 points for your cheek, for not looking up in humility when I talk sense into you, for not respecting me as I deserve to be respected. And another 100, Potter, for daring to be angry with me. If that damn position was cursed, he had less than a year to teach these dunderheads something useful. Might as well teach them everything he'd teach them in a full 7-year-long curriculum in one go. Potter had lost weight. The corner of his eye kept twitching towards the boy, and he pressed his quill down harder. Really, why teach the nature of the unforgivables only to 6th-year students? 11 years old was a fine age to start learning. This was about self-defense, after all, and it didn't make any sense at all that he'd lost weight. Potter was eating as much as his friends. No, perhaps less. But it had to do. All the Dark Lord needed to attack his mind again was one single opportunity, and instead of working against that, Potter seemed more indifferent than ever, weakening himself farther instead of blooming into that powerful young wizard Dumbledore believed him to be. Frail, unhappy, and hopeless, an open door to manipulation, ready to have his mind read and controlled, inviting the Dark Lord in with open arms. Perhaps he should suggest that his meals were soaked in some traceless sleeping potions and some vitamins once or twice a week. Of course, that would be wrong, and it'd be exactly what Potter hated. Good! A lot of vitamins would do. He was disgusted with himself for not having thought of it sooner. Potter muttered something through his teeth, and Severus was sure it was a curse. He was tempted to challenge him into repeating it out loud, just to have him look him in the eye with that raging spark again. Where was his cheek now? Where was his temper? Why did he care again? Of course, it was professionalism. His concerns were inspired by true devotion to his position and duty. The bell rang, and the brainless brood that was now called Hogwarts students gushed out of the classroom in relief. It occurred to him that the fact that his students despised him shouldn't please him this much. With all of them finally gone, Severus shrugged off the suspicion that something wasn't right, and he stood. All of them gone. But Potter. Severus shivered in horror as Potter looked up at him at last. The class is dismissed, Mr. Potter. I noticed. Contemptuous little brat! How did he dare to look at him like that? Why was he calm? Why wasn't he arrogant? Potter wasn't even blinking. What do you want, then? If Severus looked as terrified as he felt, he should just run away and hide, forever, under a rock. Potter stood too, swinging his bag up onto his shoulders and stepping closer. He was suddenly inspired to say something, and Severus could tell that it wasn't going to be clever. Why did you cancel our lessons again? Ah, was that how the story had ended up to Potter's sensitive ears? Severus almost laughed. I've been busy. The truth was because Potter had spilled his guts to Dumbledore. Daft ridiculous child. No, I want the truth. Then he'd get another lie. Because the headmaster owes me a salary that I have yet to receive. You are dismissed. Severus watched closely as the boy's inspiration turned to guilt. He suddenly recalled a sense of nostalgia from the times when Potter would lock himself in a bathroom stall and scream off his denial for having to practice occlumency again. Of course, Severus wasn't supposed to know this. You were being paid to have me in your home. Praise the gods, he has finally figured it out. Regaining his full weight that had struck home again, Severus decided that being a complete bastard wasn't a bad thing. Better end this farce for good. Of course I was. What did you think? I don't enjoy wasting my time. No one does. Right, Potter snapped. You really think I'm so stupid I'll forget what my question was about if you insult me well enough? Severus mentally bowed to the scene they were making and clapped his applause in admiration. For the last time, Potter wasn't going to have control over this. It occurred to Severus that he was falling into his own trap. At least Potter was angry. I believe I answered your question, and I do not make a habit of repeating myself. Get out! Potter wasn't going to have control over anything. Come to think of it, what the boy was still failing to grasp was that his mental stability had only been shaken by those he'd trusted, involuntary or not. But you didn't answer. Not really. Were they still on this? You thought it was a waste of time, right? You thought I'll never make it, and you didn't even think of telling me yourself. I am trying, you know. I've been clearing my mind for some time now. Severus looked at him coldly. Trying? When? If Dumbledore was teaching Potter himself and Severus wasn't aware of it, well, that would be too much. He scowled off his wistfulness for a particular bottle of scotch hidden numerous miles away.
At night, usually. It takes a while to perfect it, especially when I'm not very tired.
The words stuck together, and Severus's comprehension found its place in the world. This could only mean one thing. He watched Potter, his fragile skin pale and thin, the green eyes behind the hideous glasses, the bony shoulders that did not suit at all a Quidditch player.
You haven't been sleeping.
As soon as he said the words, he wanted to reel them back into his mouth and forget that they were ever formed. It wasn't the first time he swore to avoid displaying emotions to the outer world. It was, however, the first time that concern had hit the peak of the dangerous sentiments he should not let out.
I have. It's just not. Forget it.
Potter left, and Severus played the scene inside his head again. He laughed.